Hello, friends. This is the Netarts Friends Church podcast. We are Jesus people, Kingdom of God people, welcoming, yearning, sharing. And we're glad you're connecting here with us. We'd love to connect in person as well. If you're inclined to support this podcast or for more information, just hop on over to netartsfriends.org. That's netartsfriends.org. Let's jump into today's sermon. What are some of the skills that have become so natural to you that you can do them almost without thinking? One of the most amazing things about being human is that your brain operates by learning shortcuts. Instead of recognizing and analyzing every event, every situation and person, which would take way too long, your brain learns to use shortcuts. You learn to detect patterns and read the signs and interpret events, and then your brain performs the operation almost before you're aware that it's happening. So if I throw a ball into the air towards you, your hand might pop up to catch it almost without thinking. Or if I put a series of letters in front of you, a word just pops into your mind without you sounding it out. Or you see a red traffic light and your foot is pressing the brake before you even think about it. This is the secret of mastering any skill. Your brain learns to detect and memorize the patterns and learns the shortcuts so that the operation is happening almost before you're aware that it's happening. The carpenter taps the wall and just knows where the stud is. The musician reads the letter and their fingers move to play it without thinking. The baker feels the batter and they know just what is needed. The driver looks in his rearview mirror and he backs the trailer exactly into position. The teacher reads the room and knows whether the class is ready to push on or shift gears or needs a break. On and on and on. So, in our Sunday gathering, we had this as a quick discussion question. Perhaps you'll chat with someone or just reflect on this. What are some skills that have become so natural to you that you can do them almost without thinking? So take a moment with that. In some way, every skill you just mentioned is an interpretive skill. Your brain has memorized how to detect the patterns, how to read the conditions, and it's memorized the shortcuts, and it performs operations just voila. It just happens. And this is part of what makes us as humans truly incredible. And it also makes us vulnerable, because nobody interprets everything accurately. In between every person you interact with and every situation you encounter, and whatever you say, whatever you do, whatever changes happen in your body, whatever emotions you feel, in between that, your brain is interpreting what's happening. Your brain is coming up with thoughts and beliefs, and it's making meaning of all of the events that are happening. It's applying shortcuts that it has learned, which is often very helpful until it isn't, because nobody interprets everything correctly. We all have times and we all have situations where we completely misinterpret people and events. So does this sound familiar? Have you ever had tensions run high with someone and you say something or you do something that spins the entire situation into further reactivity or further chaos? And when you finally get around to working out the conflict, you realize that you weren't interpreting everything accurately to begin with. You didn't completely understand the other person. Maybe they didn't completely understand you. If you had understood everything that was going on, you realize you would have responded differently. You would have played your cards differently. Does that sound familiar? Or have you ever had a situation at work or a financial decision or a business decision where you misread the events and so you felt a bunch of pressure or you felt threatened or in danger or some kind of something that made you make a move and it made everything more complicated? We don't always realize all of the interpretive shortcuts that our brains are making, shifting into fix it mode, avoid it mode, argue mode, retaliation mode, panic mode. And now we've said things or done things that have made the situation much worse or possibly caused it to blow up in our face. This is the downside of interpreting, which brings us to our gospel passage today. Luke 12:54 through 13, verse 9. Jesus started by naming something that the people he was speaking to were experts at interpreting. He said to the crowd, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, 'It's going to rain.' And it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, 'It's going to be hot.' And it is. You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky." Now, to most of us, reading the actual signs of the weather is kind of like reading a foreign language. We need an interpreter. We use the news, we use an app on our phone. But Jesus was speaking to people who lived outside. They were farmers and fishermen. And in the first century, and for much of history, reading the weather was a universal language that everyone needed to know in order to survive. When to plant, when to harvest, was it safe to be out on open water? Were the conditions right for fishing? People's livelihoods rose and fell based on knowing how to read the weather and how to read it accurately. Jesus continued, "Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right or just? As you are going with your adversary to the magistrate, try hard to be reconciled on the way, or your adversary may drag you off to the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." Now, nobody likes being called a hypocrite, but Jesus was trying to help us see that we all have a tendency to pretend that we're better at interpreting everything than we actually are. Step one of learning what Jesus is saying here is accepting that my interpretation of events is not always right. There are situations that we humans are notoriously bad at interpreting. Situations that involve being wronged, situations that involve adversaries, our desire to set things right, our desire for justice. We humans are notorious for thinking that our response is going to cause things to work out in our favor and that we know how to bring justice and set situations right. But far too often, we're badly mistaken. And what we do only contributes to the reactivity and unhealth of the situation and causes things to spiral and throws us into a world of hurt. Jesus taught this same truth almost word for word in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:21 through 26. He pointed out how we know the ancient teaching, "You shall not murder," but somehow we don't see the destructive path that our anger puts us on. Now, it's easy to talk about reconciliation when you're arguing about piddly little things, but the people Jesus was talking to, they weren't living with piddly little problems. And so they began reminding Jesus of what they were actually dealing with. Luke says it this way. He says, "Now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices." These were villagers whose neighbors and loved ones had made pilgrimages from Galilee to Jerusalem to worship in the temple. Now it was supposed to be a time of gratitude, community, and rejoicing, but instead they never returned home. They were killed in the act of worship. Their bodies were found slaughtered in the temple, their blood left to run into the same drainage channels at the base of the altar as the blood of their sacrifices. It wasn't an act of terrorism. Pilate, the governor of Judea, had ordered his Gentile soldiers to enter the holy temple of Jerusalem and massacre the worshippers. It was more than an act of vengeance or the senseless brutality of a violent dictator. It was calculated political theater of the ugliest kind. Pilate used their death to taint every worshiper with fear, to squelch every hope of an uprising. He used their blood to tell every Jewish person that he held the power. They may worship a God who liberated them from Egypt, but their God couldn't save them from the power and the machine of the entire Roman army. With the snap of his fingers, he could send his soldiers into the sacred space of their temple, their God, at any time he liked, and the blood of those worshippers would be mixed with the blood of their sacrifices. They would become the sacrifice. History attests to Pilate's brutality. This wasn't like a one-off thing. When people protested against Pilate, he had plainclothes soldiers beat rioters with clubs, and many of them were killed. The people called him violent. They called him abusive, savage, ferocious. The thing about abusive people like this, people who are this cold and calculated, is that they also know how to make their victims feel like they are responsible for their own suffering, as if somehow they are to blame, as if it is their fault, which makes people question all of their instincts, all of their interpretations, and their sanity. Jesus fully acknowledged this dynamic not only with the victims of Pilate at the temple, but he also made it clear he was aware of other victims of Pilate. Jesus answered, "Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you, no." Or those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them. Do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. Jewish biblical scholar Alfred Edersheim points out that the 18 victims of the collapse of the Tower of Siloam were likely working on the aqueduct project ordered by Pilate that he had made the people pay for out of their own temple funds. It wasn't because those victims had done something wrong. These victims didn't die because they were more guilty than anyone else living in Jerusalem, the so-called city of peace. There was no justice to it. They were just more victims of Pilate. And Jesus knew the tensions were near a boiling point. He knew that many villages were saying, "Enough is enough. We have to do something. Innocent people are dying. How many more loved ones will we let Pilate kill? We can't keep waiting, hoping that something will change and doing nothing. We have to do something." The land was on the verge of war. And Jesus affirmed how dire the situation was, and yet he also warned them that if they didn't rethink their response, they were headed towards even more harm. Jesus said it with both the Temple Massacre story and the Tower of Siloam story. He said, unless you repent, which is rethink, you too will all perish. Unless you repent, unless you rethink, you too will all perish. That word perish is the description of the destruction of a city or a tribe or a group of people. It is slaughter in war. Jesus was warning the people that if they stayed on this path, they were headed towards war and it wasn't going to end well. And 40 years later, what Jesus was warning the people about happened because too many of them did stay on this path. The tension erupted in the Jewish-Roman War of 66 through 73 AD. It didn't end well. Thousands and thousands of non-combatant people were slaughtered. Some say that the historian Josephus was exaggerating, but he puts the number at 1.1 million non-combatants killed. Jerusalem was burned, the temple was destroyed. So can you hear Jesus in all of this? He is empathizing and validating the people's experience of suffering while also trying to steer them away from a response that would bring them even greater destruction. Jesus went on to tell a story. He said, a man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard. One day he went out to pick some figs, but he didn't find any. And so he said to the gardener, for 3 years I've been coming and looking for figs on this tree, and I haven't found any yet. Chop it down. Why should it take up space? Jesus was describing feelings that we are all very familiar with. You've put up with a situation for long enough. For years, you've been waiting for something to change. You've poured way more than you should have into this situation. This relationship is draining your strength. It's exhausting your entire system. It isn't producing anything positive. You don't have anything to show for all your efforts and sacrifice. You're losing money. You're losing space. You're losing productivity. You've given second and third chances. You've given the benefit of the doubt. Nothing is changing. You aren't gaining anything from this. And there's a response that begins to bubble up out of you, and all of your interpretive energy says, do something drastic. Enough is enough. Cut it down. Dig it out. You're ready for a complete overhaul. You've had enough with the old fig tree. You're ready for a new fig tree, a new ruler, a new boss, a new spouse, a new job, a new home. Fill in the blank with your new something. Take a moment to get in touch with some of those feelings and some of those responses within you. The gardener answered, Master, leave it for another year. I'll dig around it. I'll put some manure on it to make it grow. Maybe it will have figs on it next year. If it doesn't, you can have it cut down. Why did Jesus tell this story to people who knew how to interpret the weather and knew how to farm fig trees? Jesus was introducing one of the spiritual skills, the skills of spiritual maturity that for some of us is more difficult than anything else. It's the spiritual skill of being still, leaving it alone. Yes, there are times that the Spirit calls us to take leaps of faith, that the Spirit calls us to put our faith into action. And there are times when the situation looks dire, but the Spirit says, let it alone, hands off, let it be this year. I will dig around in it, not you. I will dig around. I will put dung, manure, poop around it. Let's see what happens. So take this in for a minute. What Jesus is saying. Let it alone this year until I dig about it and dung it. Your situation was already poopy. You had a tree that was bearing no fruit, and every instinct you've got says just be done with it. Except that there's a holy pause, there's a divine whisper. It's something you could easily ignore, except that you do experience it as real, and it's slowing you down. Instead of digging around in the situation or putting the axe to the situation, you're invited by some kind of a still small voice to slow down, to pause, to just let it be. Let it alone. Cool down. Give it time. Don't say anything. Don't do anything just yet. Just wait. The thing about manure is that it doesn't look like it's changing anything. It's slow and it sits there. It looks like nothing is happening. It's not shiny. It's not new. Nothing looks like it's getting fixed. And you sit there and you watch while your poopy situation gets even poopier, which makes you feel massively impatient and unseen and unheard and like God isn't doing anything, and can make you wonder if your interpretive skills are completely broken and maybe you are losing your mind. I think that this spiritual skill of being still, leaving it alone, is every bit as terrifying and difficult as some of the biggest leaps of faith Jesus will ever ask you to take. Because the only thing you've got to go on is that whisper that says, wait, maybe there's more happening under the surface than you can see. Maybe your interpretive skills don't see everything. Sometimes, under the surface, the manure of the situation is overflowing with all kinds of nutrients and enzymes and microorganisms that get the food processes of the soil headed in the right direction to feed the plant. Manure creates the right conditions for healthy processes to happen. It's not only true of plants, it's true of relationships and all kinds of life situations, because sometimes there's more going on behind the scenes and under the surface than what you know. And as good as you are at interpreting things, you can't see it all clearly. So if you can simply listen to those holy pauses when they come, and only you can say, up, that was a pause. I know that it was. If you can slow yourself down, give that other person your most generous interpretation. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Keep from digging around in the situation, making it worse. Lean hard into the possibility of reconciliation, restoration, rather than retaliation and retribution. Sometimes, under the surface, those conditions necessary for healthy processes to happen are coming together. Sometimes you may be closer to fruit than you think. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying to just go with the pause. Do you know this experience? The situation sets off your alarm bells. You are so ready to do something, but there's that divine pause. There's some kind of a be still, know that I'm God. Do you know this experience of swallowing your words? You pause your reactivity, you do nothing except to trust God, the manure shoveler, who sometimes makes poopy situations even poopier. We could end here and we could go home with an ugly question lurking in the background. Did Jesus tell parables like this And did they actually create the conditions that allowed people like Pilate to have his ugly power? Some people say it like this. They say, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. It's the same kind of question. And is that what's going on here with Jesus? Like, what good did it do for any followers of Jesus to be still and to seek reconciliation with Pilate the governor, the brutal ruler who had worshipers massacred in the temple and oversaw the crucifixion of Jesus himself? What good did it do to be still with him, to pause with him? Well, we need to know the rest of the Pilate story. We know that Pilate's reign didn't last much longer. We know this from history. He was accused of violence against innocent people, and to make a long story short, he lost his position as governor of Judea. At that point, the history is sparse, patchy, and mixed. One tradition says that Pilate wearied with misfortune and he killed himself, but that's not the only story. One of the earliest writers of the early church, the church father Tertullian, wrote that Pilate and also Pilate's wife became followers of Jesus. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Egyptian or Coptic church tradition, they both consider Pilate and his wife as saints who gave their lives as martyrs, ultimately declaring their allegiance to Jesus, the same one who commanded worshipers to be killed in the temple, ultimately came to faith in Jesus and was willing to give his life in allegiance to Jesus. Could it be possible? So we're left with a terrifying and hope-filled possibility. Might there be times in your life when all the alarm bells are going off and your interpretation of the situation says, say something, do something, enough is enough? Might there be times when you experience a real slowing down, a real pause, a real still small voice that is trying to help you avoid further harm? Could it be possible that situations you cannot imagine improving could yet grow in health, could yet produce good fruit, could yet end in reconciliation? So a final reflection, question. What part of this gospel passage is most difficult for you? And what part is the most hopeful for you? Thank you for joining us for a Sunday sermon from Netart's Friends Church. We hope you'll join us soon for one of our in-person worship gatherings. For more information, hop on over to netartsfriends.org. God's peace be with you, friends.